Welcome to another episode of DevShop Stories. My name is Josh, and I have Tanner here with me as well as Spencer. So thank you for coming on. Today we're going to share a story about DevShop tools, so common tools that we use. And the story begins with kind of the infancy of a developer. A lot of times when you're first starting off, you just kind of code and just hope for the best, that you make terrible assumptions that your software is never going to get corrupted, your hard drive's never going to die. And this actually happened with me at one of my previous employments, where we actually kept no version controlling system. And I was kind of taught by kind of one of the senior mentors, you just change the file name, every now and then. So you'd add version 3 or V3 at the end. And then when you update it, you go V4. And also, he taught me put your change notes at the very top of the file. And so they just actually grow and grow and grow at the very top. And it just becomes a mess. And so finally, some of these small files that had maybe 20, 30 lines of code would actually have 100 lines of comments at the top, possibly. So it got pretty ridiculous. And so over time at RedSky Engineering, we actually have developed the tools that we've used that kind of help better enforce. And so, Spencer, have you had kind of any experiences like that?
Yeah, I've been in a few other companies and teams where we've had lack of processes where, there's no processes, there's no code reviews that are done. And it kind of works okay when you're a sole developer. But what starts to happen is as soon as you add a second person onto your team, changes start happening that you're not always aware of. Somebody may fundamentally re-architect the program, and then maybe a day or two later, you start to look at it and you're going, I don't know what I'm looking at. I don't know how to make changes, or this could have been done better, or this was unnecessary. And it's really hard to be in a collaborative environment when somebody's able to just make changes without any kind of feedback or peer reviews.
Right. What about you, Tanner?
Yeah, we've done it just internally, grown from that. When we started with RedSky, before it was RedSky, it was, just a few of us working on private label DR stuff, one of our other companies. And we didn't have any processes, any tooling. We were still trying to figure out what we wanted to do and what worked and what didn't work, what works on teams, what works as for a sole developer, what that kind of composition and dynamics going to look like. And we'd grown from not doing really anything. I mean, everybody used GitHub right out the gate because that's what everybody used at first. And that's morphed into using, other tools. We use still Git under the hood, but we use GitLab for different purposes. We have different documentation tools. We have other pieces that we've developed and worked across to really help check all of the boxes in the other areas. But it all kind of started with, I think, the shift from GitHub to GitLab for us.
Right. And actually, let me take a step back. And for those who are not, in the thick of code all day long. So what my history was going from kind of changing files by file name to actually using something called CVS, which is concurrent versioning system, which essentially was kind of a server that you would, when you make file changes, you would actually upload those changes and it would be saved there. And I actually remember one scenario where I wasn't checking in code often enough, and I actually went a full week without actually checking in any code. And what happened was I did some, I think I went and I got so quick at right click in Windows Explorer and delete all your files, right? And then you could also you hold down Shift delete when you actually went to delete, and that would not just put in the recycling bin, that would permanently delete. And I actually grabbed the wrong folder one time, deleted all those files, and lost over a week's worth of work, just in one swipe. So
that's awful.
But continuing on, so it went CVS to SVN subversion to Git is what we're kind of the popular thing that is there. And there's been other versioning systems. I think Mercurial is one of them. Have you ever used that?
I've not used Mercurial.
Yeah, I used it at
Bitbucket, or not Bitbucket. There's, what is it, Bitkeeper or
something like that. Yeah, I used Mercurial at my last place. Definitely more cumbersome than Git. Git is it's done very well.
Right.
They checked a lot of the right boxes.
Yeah. So what we're going to do for the rest of this episode is actually go through the actual tools that we use at RedSky Engineering. And so, for example, for our source code control, we use GitLab. And the reason why we use GitLab is it had a lot of features out of the box. Now, I would say GitHub has actually caught up with a lot of the features that GitLab has. And so now it's just kind of, historical, we know how to use it. We've got a lot of our scripts written to use GitLab, but it would be pretty easy to switch between GitLab to GitHub if we needed to. So for example, GitLab, we use continuous integration and continuous development, CI/CD. And Spencer's actually written a lot of our scripts that actually do that. So any comments there?
Yeah, one of the things, we like to use the CI within our code repositories. It helps. We can automate a lot of checking as people make changes into the project. We can make sure the project still builds. We have automated tests we can run that ensure some level of regression of things that we've written in the past still work, so that we have the confidence going forward that things aren't just breaking without us knowing.
Well, we set those up too to run on our own custom runners as well, right? We don't use the shared runners that GitLab provides. There is a limit on the resources there. So we set up, you specifically converted the runners from that old Alienware, right?
Yeah.
Over to the newer nice machine.
Yeah, so we have a computer that's sitting at our office that we actually use on site. And so whenever somebody pushes some code in, it sends a signal to one of the computers in our office to say, hey, take this code, download it, and check it all out, right?
Yep. Run the executions, run those regression tests, do all of those things that we tell it to do in those script files. So
we also in GitLab use their issue tracking for quite a while, and we don't use it anymore. We've switched to other software, and we'll get to that in a second. But so we use that to kind of record our bugs, our new features, our sprint planning.
Yeah, we used the Kanban system for quite a while there inside of GitLab. I think that was like one of the primary drivers on why we switched that and the CI/CD for the most part. But yeah, we used the Kanban system for quite a while there. And then come to find out we needed some more tooling that GitLab didn't quite offer, hence the move on that system. But we still use it for a lot of the internal pieces. We did use it for documentation for a while, if you remember that.
Right. Yeah. In GitLab, they have, milestones. So you can kind of say, hey, we're going to, by this date, have these issues either solved or these features implemented. And they also had a wiki where you can kind of do documentation in there. So it was pretty good. But we've actually switched from using GitLab kind of wiki to store information about it to different documentation schemes. In previous employments, we used Media Wiki. So if you think about Wikipedia, everybody out there has used Wikipedia before. And Media Wiki is kind of the open source version of that. You can host it yourself and do that. Do you remember using that at the previous work, Spencer?
Yeah, I remember using that.
And so you get to, especially doing things like tables, we use this weird syntax and try to.
Yeah, it's like on Wikipedia. If you want to do anything, you have to know the syntax, and you kind of have to know the tool really well, which you really don't want to. You want to be doing other things, right?
And I think we even created articles about, well, if you want to do a table, here's what the code looks like from a table inside the Media Wiki. So you can just copy and paste that, right?
Yeah, from a UI standpoint, it is rough though. Mm-hmm. It is old.
Yeah.
But at the same time, people could just make changes to an article or its formatting, and there's no standardization. There's 5 different ways maybe to make a table in Media Wiki.
And then we went from kind of Media Wiki to GitLab Wiki to now what we're doing is Confluence. Confluence is made by Atlassian, and they've got a number of other tools, and we'll talk about some of them. But Confluence is like Google Docs on steroids. It's really easy to edit it, to add headers, to add tables, to just insert, but it keeps everything organized in a nice cohesive way. You can add new articles, you can do links, you can do images just by adding them there. And then it's, Spencer's favorite thing about it is searchability, right?
Oh yeah, they have a good search tool, and especially when somebody else has already written an article and you're trying to keyword search something, right?
And then it lets you leverage tagging systems and stuff like that quite a bit, and a lot of organization on top of it. And then the benefit is that you can find things actually with the different spaces and restrict people down. There's a good permission set in there too that's kind of baked in.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of companies I know personally, they just use Google Drive and they just have a number of Google Docs and spreadsheets all throughout, all these different folders and everything. And it just becomes kind of difficult. And it's what I find so funny is that Google is a search engine company, but they make one of the worst search ever for Google Drive.
Yeah, Google Drive is a pain in the butt.
Or even if you have a file share with folders with documents, with like Word documents and Excel sheets, those are hard to search through when you need to actually search the content of what's.
Yeah, you don't get any content searching really unless you explicitly search for that file. right? Or inside that file.
And so Confluence can be hosted, you can self-host it, so you can run your own server, and that's what we did for a number of years. But then you have to worry about uptime. I've had it where it's crashed before, and I had to go in and do repairing of files and just all that headache. To now their big push is the cloud. And what really got me hooked is you can do 10 people for free in one space. And so we had users 1 through 9 with people's real names, and then we had developer Johnson as the 10th user, and everybody that was new after we added more people to the company was developer Johnson, right? For quite a while,
Yeah, it was a long time too.
Well, and going back to that self-hosted option, I think Confluence that's only an option now, I think, for enterprise companies.
Yeah, they deprecated the one that we did before, the self-host.
Yeah, especially for smaller companies, they don't even want to support that anymore.
They want to push everybody to a SaaS model, which can't blame them. And so we have obviously switched over to cloud. It was seamless. We were able to import everything, and then we now pay for everybody. And we actually now have added it so that our requirements for a project are outlined inside of Confluence, and we give our customers one free login, right?
Yeah, we merged some of the resourcing that we've done inside of Confluence into our PM process and utilize that as kind of one of our PM tools now, because we like the permission set. We like how the interaction is there. And then, like you said, we part of the offering for one of the clients is, hey, we're going to have all of this completely documented, all of the acceptance criteria, all of the feature set inside of here. And we're going to provide a user for you to that space so you can see all of this detail and you know exactly what you're going to get on those projects. So,
and if they want more than one user, we just charge them the difference, $7 a month or whatever it is kind of thing.
Yeah, they can have whatever they want. Like we've added whole QA teams so they can go through and verify the acceptance criteria on tickets and such, as that correlates over to the ticketing system. And
so that's documentation. To kind of recap, we use Confluence there for control, source code control. We use GitLab, but project management tools are kind of, there's a lot of them out there. A long time ago when I was doing a lot of software development, it didn't seem like there was many options that people use. You could use Microsoft Project was kind of one of the popular ones that I know PMs would use. And I remember we would use Redmine at a previous company. You remember Redmine, Spencer?
Yeah, I remember Redmine.
Yeah. So, create issues, create tickets. You can do stuff. It's open source. We actually use Redmine not only for developers, but they actually used it for manufacturing processes to actually see what's in the queue to be created, what was, next up in the job work orders and stuff. But we've now gone from Redmine to GitLab, where we're using that to kind of manage, what our sprints were, to finally now we've landed on Jira. And Jira is another software package by the people that made Confluence, Atlassian. And the reason why we didn't stick with GitLab specifically was Jira is kind of the industry standard, one of the top project management tools. And it gives you a lot of flexibility. And I know, Tanner, you've spent quite a bit of time with Jira. Your thoughts there?
Yeah, I love it. It's pretty daunting at first to get into because it does everything you could imagine. There's so much there. But after you get the kind of your setup running, it actually works really well. So for us, you can set up projects a couple of different ways. You can set up a company project or a team project. And the real distinction there is how permissions work. And for us with third-party clients, when they have stuff come in, we set them up as a team, right? So we can set that permission set and we actually give the client access to that Jira instance, to that team project, and restrict it down with a group and, all of the permission sets there. But it's phenomenal. It allows us full kind of agile methodology with the milestones and epics and sprints and all of that stuff that we can set up inside of the project. And then we have a whole process that I know we've talked about before, where we have how the ticket lifecycle is, how that goes into the QA process. It really manages things in a very elegant way. And then we can directly tie that back to Confluence tickets and the acceptance criteria in there. So it's bidirectionally linked. It's really convenient.
Yeah. Spencer, your thoughts on Jira?
What I like about Jira too is it reflects the process of what we actually do. So it's customizable in a way where you can make your flows actually match how things are really working. Like the process a ticket goes through, right? Of where it gets reported, when's it going to be done, which sprints are going to be done in. So you could plan out the next 1-2 months of work if you wanted to go that far ahead. Yeah, and it's a very good tool for managing what's going on. So everybody from the developers to the project managers have a clear view of what's coming down.
Yeah. Now, I will say one negative to it is their API is horrendous.
Trying to pull data out. And that is...
going back to the customability of it too, is if you don't set up your flows just right, you could really make a mess of your projects too. So you've got to know what you're doing in there.
And that is one of the things that we actually do like about Jira is being able to extract data out of it. But we've just had to settle on doing CSV dumps to a kind of a text file. And then our project managers will take those dumps of data and drop it into a spreadsheet. And that's where it calculates developer efficiency, time on task, average time per ticket, all that kind of stuff.
Yep. Yeah. We extract a lot of the information from the Jira tickets and tasks where we track what stage it's in, who's doing what, all the way through the QA process, how many times direct issues have come up. We can extract all of that data and then run a bunch of analytics across it. It's really nice.
So to kind of recap, Jira, again, is a great tool. It's difficult to set up, but once you have it set up, it's flowing and it works well. Going on to design tools, the next one is how do you have a UI designer, show to a developer what needs to be created? And our progression at RedSky Engineering has gone through a number of different steps. One is there is no design.
Yeah.
You just kind of code it. And we had some coders that were better at design than others, right?
Yeah.
And so
just make it look reasonable.
Yep.
Developer design is a huge negative. Don't do that.
Yeah. You should see some of my UIs.
Which is, let me go on a side tangent here real quick. We used to do a developer test that they had to do before they'd come in. And we would give them this challenge of, hey, make a website that shows a list of users and a table and add a user, delete user, change a user. But we gave them zero design to work off. We just said, yeah, just, do what you want. And the designs we got back were so horrendous.
Yeah. Some of them were okay.
Yeah.
Nothing was ever good.
Yeah.
They were okay, but some of them, man, my eyes still burn from the colors.
And I remember, Spencer working on together at our previous company, you love to use just the primary colors, just like bright red, bright green, bright blue.
Well, especially if I was just frameworking out a UI for functionality and I clearly want to see, margins and boundaries. Like, all right, this is going to be green. This one's going to be blue. Yeah, that's very clear. I kind of want to make it ugly so that because I didn't have a design, I'm like, well, I need something, and nobody's gonna ever give a thumbs up on this.
Right.
Make it so ugly that you have to change it.
Yeah, hopefully they change it.
At least that was my philosophy.
So once we started contracting designers, we went through a number of different tools. So we first started with Sketch, which was all right. It's a Mac application that only runs on Mac, can't run on Windows or any other OS. They would design it in there, and then they'd push it to kind of their Sketch cloud, and that was kind of nice because then developers don't need to have a Mac. They don't need to have that software installed. They can click on the elements, see the margins and the paddings and everything like that. Then we needed other people to kind of sometimes work on the designs. And so they actually transitioned from Sketch to Adobe XD because, obviously Adobe, they're huge and they're going to make the best tools in the world. Well, guess what? This tool was terrible.
Yeah, it was good after it loaded. It just took 10 minutes to load. It was awful.
Yep. And they were trying to do their Adobe XD cloud to kind of compete with Sketch. And it felt like that was kind of terrible because the designers, they had to individually click on certain elements and say export. And if they forgot about it, and they had to remember to do it every time too, it was just, it just did not work. And so then we got word of Figma, and Figma is a fully in the cloud design solution. So no desktop application, completely done in the cloud. They use, I think, like Wasm to actually generate really fast code that runs on their surface, although we'll have future talks where we don't think Wasm is as fast as it should be. It is a really nice tool. And so right away, developers can get into it and they can navigate around. They can zoom in, zoom out and stuff. The only challenge that we had with Figma is that it didn't do versioning. And so we couldn't lock down and say, hey, this is MVP. Now the designer is going to go on and work with the customer and kind of start working on, the next version,
And it's crucial for us, particularly with Fixbid, to have a locked version, right? That way the client signed off on this. Anything else is out of scope. It's not in this project. It's not on this work order. It was locked here. The nice thing too, that we didn't mention on Figma, that is the collaborative nature of it, right? Is you do have multiple people working on the same document at the same time.
Right.
There's a lot of nice things to it.
I kind of want to interject here a little bit, but So what's the advantage these tools give developers or the whole process versus just getting a PNG from a graphics designer? Again, in our previous company, that's how we got our graphics design. It was just, here's a PDF or here's some PNGs.
Make it look and match and stuff.
We've had clients who have done that same thing.
Yeah.
They just wanted a picture.
What is the advantages?
Yeah, what are the advantages of these tools?
For me, it's the capability of seeing pixel accurate representations of what you need. And so for that, what I mean is you can actually go into these tools and you can click on a button and you can you have that button highlighted and selected, and you move your mouse over to the left side or the right side and it'll say, well, you need a 16 pixel margin this exactly, and you need that. Whereas what I found a lot with a PNG of here's what the design looks like is that developers try their best, but they're not the greatest at seeing patterns and consistency. And so they just, they're like, oh, it looks close enough, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and it's, you get the consistency out of the design where it's like, hey, for us, we standardize on like our 8 pixel margins, right? Or variables of that, variants of that. So to have that standardization, because like you said, I mean, I can't see 3 pixels versus 4 pixels.
Right.
I mean, some people can, I can't,
Well, and going back to the images, or end up starting to use ruler tools and not like, and it could be a difference of 3 or 4, and it depends on where you click on your ruler.
Yeah, it's highly, highly subjective.
Yeah. And so these tools make it nice. The other thing that they allow you to do is easily export. And so a designer might put in a number of different icons. And for the developer to actually get those icons out, they might, with the PNG, they'd either have to go back to the designer and say, hey, send these as separate files and do that. With these tools like Figma and Sketch, you can actually click on them and say, export the assets. And for that, you'll get a zip file that'll have your icons or whatever you need specifically from that.
Yeah, but that didn't give us everything, right? We had mentioned it didn't give us versioning. So for us, our designer, Caitlin, actually found a tool that she really liked that helped kind of bridge the gap between design and development, where there can be a lot of conversation, annotations on behavior, things like that. It's called Zeppelin. We use actually a combination currently of Figma and Zeppelin to really bridge that gap. Figma is phenomenal for a design tool. And then Zeppelin lets us stamp versions and have dialogue on interactions, behavior, expectations, and what the designer was thinking at the time on how this is supposed to function and the intention behind it.
And I can go right there in Zeppelin, and if I have a question on the behavior or maybe something that doesn't make sense in the design, I could just comment right there and be like, our designer, Caitlin, she's answering within like 5 minutes.
Yeah,
she's great.
She's phenomenal.
Yep. I mean, all these tools, Figma and Zeppelin, they'll have tie-ins to Slack. So that is one of the things we didn't mention. Our communication tools, we use Slack for our developers and designers to communicate, but you will add a question in Zeppelin, and then Caitlin would respond, and all of a sudden you get a Slack message saying, so-and-so responded. And so it's really fast, tight feedback loops there. The other thing with Zeppelin, I believe, is like you're saying, the annotations and the behaviors. With Figma, you can do comments, you can leave, little comments, but Caitlin can specifically tag certain things as, here's the behavior. When you click this button, I want to have a slide in animation, and I want to have this new page come in, or whatever, and then annotations would just kind of give more context to the developer, see what needs to happen there.
Yeah. And then for me, I like one of the nice things about Zeppelin is it gives me that whole flow. So it's just laid out a little differently. Now, there are nice things about Figma where I can kind of zoom in and out and go wherever I want, but Zeppelin constrains a little bit more to specific flows. So if I'm going through the account creation flow, right, I get that entire process, step-by-step process of what those pages look like. So
to kind of recap, design tools, we use Figma plus Zeppelin, but then we have a QA team. And so we have a lead QA person, quality assurance when I say QA. And then we have, some other people that help out there and possibly automated tests and somebody that's writing those. But the tools that we use, we started off with just Google Sheets, right? Every single page, every single interaction. We wanted to test everything, right?
Yep. Yeah. And it's cumbersome. There's a ton of work to keep those sheets up to date. Anytime they had to do regression testing, I remember every time with one of our old systems, they would just shake their head and it's like, oh man, okay, we got to go replicate this whole thing. And go through this 100+ column or 100+ rows of test cases. And it's just a big, heavy thing.
Well, and then trying to keep that up to date with the new designs or as things actually change. Now you start to have disconnects between what are you testing and what do you actually want.
Features and functionality as they change. There's no direct correlation unless you hyperlink some ticket somewhere. So it was bad. Yeah.
So we moved on from Google Sheets, and we still use them for, I'd say, kind of some smaller projects. We might use that, but Jira has paid plugins that you can actually get, and X-Ray is one of the ones that our lead QA person landed on was X-Ray, and that allows you to kind of associate Jira tasks, tickets, features, user stories to kind of a specific test and have the actions that are going to have to take place to test this out, the test results, and all that's kind of contained nicely in Jira.
Yep. And it represents the development tickets. Like that's how it interacts, is just like one of the feature tickets or a task or a bug or whatever. And then it keeps a history of completion and successes and failures, and you can annotate why. And it basically gives you what Google Sheets had come to give everybody, just in a very nice, clean, elegant way and easy to access. And then it's directly already tied to the tickets.
So X-Ray is kind of our QA tool. I would say in addition to X-Ray, the thing that really makes QA shine is having an awesome QA person. And we have somebody named Dan that is phenomenal at it. And it's kind of like the developer's kind of nightmare of like, well, Dan's going to catch that and he's going to come over and make you fix it and stuff.
Yeah,
and so,
he is top shelf. I mean, Dan is phenomenal at QA, both function and design. I think he takes some pride in nailing people on some of those items.
And I think he has some sense to him too, because anytime you start when you have a project that's dealing with calendars and timekeeping, you always run into a class of bugs dealing with time zones and daylight savings. Just this last week, he was trying to log something from a month ago, and it's like, oh, what do you know? It happened to go through daylight savings, and it created an interesting bug in the UI where you always assume 24 hours a day, and it's like, well...
Yeah, not always.
Not always.
And that's the thing that is really valuable from the personnel standpoint, as being kind of in that mindset, is having somebody who really understands and looks at it from the client's perspective and usability of it, not just function and, yeah, does this do what it's supposed to do and look like it's supposed to? It's like, is this nice to use?
So recap, QA tools, we're using X-Ray. Sometimes Google Sheets have a really great QA tester on your team as well. So now we're going to go into dev tools, and these are going to be highly subjective to the developer, right? The ones that you use, but we find certain commonalities and we kind of try to teach them to new employees that come in. So with an IDE, integrated debugger environment, there's kind of two popular ones in the web world. There's VS Code and there's the JetBrains line of IDEs. And so the one that we've landed on that we use quite a bit is PHP Storm, which is funny because we're not PHP developers at all. We can go in there and we can do PHP work. We have a couple of clients, but we don't like it. It's not our cup of tea. But we use PHP Storm, and the reason why is JetBrains, the company that made all these IDEs. They have WebStorm, PHP Storm. They've got PyCharm. They've got Android Studio, all these kind of things.
I think they even have one called WebStorm too. That's
they do.
WebStorm. Yeah. Yep. And so what WebStorm, the reason why we didn't go with WebStorm, it does your JavaScript and your Node.js, but it doesn't have the database tools in it. They made a separate product called DataGrip that has kind of database tools. But PHP Storm integrated that all because a lot of PHP developers are doing front end and back end. And so they're doing database design work all the time. So we use PHP Storm because it has all those parts to it.
Yeah, it feels like a superset to WebStorm. Yeah.
Yeah, because it lets us do our JavaScript, TypeScript, HTML.
And it's, it's $100 a year, and it's, just a payment that the company does for the employees and stuff. So a lot of people, they actually navigate towards VS Code because it's 100% free, open source. But what you get with VS Code is you get to build your IDE, essentially, is the way I look at it.
Yeah, they've got plugins for everything.
Yep. You get to find the plugins. You get to configure the plugins. You get to, make sure they're up to date and do all that kind of stuff. And it doesn't feel like it's all inclusive, and you don't have a company that's making money that puts it all together in a nice package.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of funny too. It's developers are funny. We use it every single day, right? Like it is our tool. If I'm a framer, it's my hammer, right? It is what I do every day. But we're so cheap and don't want to pay $100 a year for what is a phenomenal tool.
Or if you go to Visual Studio Land, like they're charging more than $100 a year for that.
Oh yeah, yeah. Anything that's your .NET stuff.
And then so again, when we get to database tools, where you're kind of looking at data or changing the structure of a database, popular tools are kind of like MySQL Workbench, and I think there's like Tiger database tools. But again, since PHP Storm has a built-in, that's what I typically use. What are I know, Spencer, you've jumped around a little bit.
Yeah, I would say I use probably PHP Storm for most of the database things. Sometimes there's some inefficiencies with its database, so I might use MySQL Workbench or if that one tool. I could probably do 90% of my work just in that one IDE.
The thing I really like about the PHP Storm database tool or data grip is that I can connect to a ton of different database types. So I can connect to my Mongo database. I don't have to go into, Mongo Shell. I can connect to MySQL or MariaDB. I can connect to Microsoft, MS SQL. I can, whatever I want. They have, probably 30 plus drivers to connect to the different databases. So I get everything that I need all in that one tool.
And then there's other tools and other plugins that you usually get with PHP Storm. One of them was Redis. Redis is a great kind of memory caching software technology. And there was no initial built into PHP Storm Redis capability. And so we'd always buy there's like $1 or $2 a year Redis plugin. And some developers are so cheap, they don't even want to pay that. They'd rather use the command line and log into the Redis server and do stuff like that.
I don't even think Redis makes a good GUI for their own
They don't.
utility.
No, it's command line, which is fine. But again, the value of having it all in your IDE, I can just use shortcuts and I can get to whatever I want. It just speeds up the development cycle quite a bit.
However, with that said, PHP Storm just released their new version just a week ago, and it has built-in Redis support now into it. I guess you can't complain about the $2 anymore, right?
The funny thing about the $2 is I think people didn't want to go through the effort of making like an account, like a purchase order, an account just to buy this like $5 a year piece of software.
Right.
Like there's just an annoyance to that.
The next big topic is operating system. You got people that are Windows, Mac, Linux, right? And then at our dev shop, we have a mixture there. We have a lot of people, I'd say 95% of people are Windows users, a few Mac users. And we had one guy for a while that was just pure Linux Gen 2, build it from scratch. Spent his first 2 days building his operating system.
Yes, he did. It was so long.
But we use Linux quite often in our servers, in our GitLab runners that we're talking about there. And it just becomes, it's almost necessary. If you're in the open source world, you need to have Linux and Linux knowledge, right?
Well, yeah. And even our Windows developers are still developing within WSL, which is just a Linux subsystem for Windows. And Mac is very similar to that Linux ecosystem too. It's a lot of the same commands. And
yeah, so we have actually taught classes. So we try to do continuing education with our developers. And so we want to make sure that they're very comfortable in Linux. And so we have video resources and tooling and teaching and stuff where we go over Linux command line.
Yep. Yeah, it's important to know. I mean, if you're going to do, like you had mentioned, anything in open source and web development, I mean, you have to know the Linux command line.
And so, like Spencer had mentioned, there is WSL, and now there's actually WSL 2, which is the one that I'd definitely recommend because it runs a true Linux kernel inside of it. But before that, we actually ran Git Bash, which was somebody that took Bash as one of the command line programs that runs there, and somebody has ported it to Windows. And so you'd actually bring up a terminal in Windows, but you're always still on the Windows file system. You couldn't use, every package that you wanted to use had to have been ported over to Windows. You weren't actually using native Linux software there.
Yeah, there were some nuances with that we kept coming across when we would try to, like you said, have a new package that we wanted to use, or just some of the runtime issues that we were coming across between the Windows OS and the Linux OS, specifically like case sensitivity and stuff like that.
Yep. WSL2 is definitely recommended at RedSky Engineering. And then we kind of get into other tools and scripts that kind of run. So Prettier is one of the ones that we actually use quite often. And what that does is whenever you go to save or if you run a command line, it just takes the code formatting out of the equation of arguments, essentially, is the way I look at it. We basically set up and say, hey, Prettier is going to take your file and however you typed it, it's going to format it to the way, very opinionated way that Prettier wants it. And we just said, accept it.
And then developers aren't fighting over how we indent in or how, it's just like, well, the formatter just does it for us.
Yeah. Well, and we took it a step further and put that on a pre-commit as part of one of our continuous hooks for CI/CD, where it will run that formatter before your code even gets committed.
Right. So you don't even have to think about running it. So just.
Yep. It's out of sight, out of mind. It just is all the same.
Now, here's the thing is that sometimes those hooks could be bypassed and somebody could still submit the code. And so what we did was we actually put it as one of our GitLab CI/CD checks. It says, run across the files that they just committed. Does it still pass? If not, actually put it as a failure. So you can't even merge that code into our dev branches. So, and then you also have linters, and linters are things that will basically inspect your code as you're typing in and kind of give you warnings or status about, hey, you're not following the proper procedures, or you're not, it's not necessarily the code formatting. It's kind of the code that you actually have in there, whether it follows the standard that you have there. After that, we have kind of TypeScript versus JavaScript. And this is kind of a funny one because, obviously a lot of people learn JavaScript first. And so that becomes the language that they're really comfortable with. And especially if they didn't come from a strongly typed background, if they didn't do, strong C or C++ or C#, those types of languages as their first language that they learned on, they don't get the whole reason of like, why do you need to say something is a number or an int or a Boolean or a floating point number? And so they don't feel that, kind of thing. They're like, why can't I just say var, var name, equals Josh. Yeah. And so when you start introducing TypeScript to them, they feel like they're being handcuffed. They feel like they're only typing on the keyboard with one hand, right?
Yeah, well, because JavaScript, for all intended purposes, is the Wild West, right? You can do anything you want,
and you can start making changes. And now, do you still have code that it even has compatible interfaces with it? Are your return types compatible? Not everything's a string or a number. You can have a complex return object.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's funny. We were talking about this yesterday of like, back in the day, we would have to, the only way with JavaScript to really see what is going on is to learn your debugger, right? So you had to put in a breakpoint to see what that object actually was. Because there's nothing that tells you what it is other than at runtime. So it was crazy. I remember when we were first transitioning over to TypeScript, right? You had played with it and we're like, all right, we're going to do this. Man, I fought tooth and nail over that. I did not want to do TypeScript.
Yep. Yeah. And so much so that McKay, my partner, came to you and said, hey, we need to quickly spin up this new project. And so you spun it up as JavaScript. And when I started looking at it, I'm like, wait, this is JavaScript. This is not TypeScript.
Yeah.
And I came over and pulled over and said, well, let's redo it again. And let me help you, through the pains of TypeScript and stuff. And now you're a huge TypeScript advocate.
Yeah, I love it. I wish all of our stuff was TypeScript at this point. But yeah, it's that initial ramp up time of like, okay, how does this work? What is it? What are the nuances compared to JavaScript? And coming to that realization that, hey, it's not actually handcuffing you. It's really actually liberating and convenient. It saves you a tremendous amount of time, especially on a team.
Yeah, and as the project gets larger and you start making changes in a larger project, it's like, how's this actually going to propagate through the code? And with typeless languages like JavaScript, Python, like you said, the only way to know what's going on is with a debugger. It's like, okay, what is this actual object? Because your parameter is just the parameter.
It's arbitrary.
It's
right?
arbitrary. It could change and you don't know it.
Well, that's a good lead in because the next topic is debuggers. And so you can go from not using any debugger, which sadly, that's how a lot of developers have been taught. They use console logs. So they just kind of print out certain states or they just guess and check. But us at RedSky Engineering, we strongly basically force you have to use a debugger. You have to become efficient with the dev tools that are in Chrome. You have to be good with PHP Storm debugging or VS Code debugging. It just has to be part of your nature.
Oh, yeah. Do you remember we had a contract before and we were cross-training one of their new developers that they were bringing on. And
who had been working for a while.
Yeah, like 6 years in the industry. And our first question to him was like, hey, let's set up your debugger. And he's like, wait, what? Hold on. You've coded for 6 years and don't know how to use a debugger? Like, no wonder you're slow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it goes wild because it's really a required tool. I don't think you can't not use a debugger. And I think you even need to go a step further, knowing how to remote debug things. It may be, if you have a microcontroller, how do you debug that? Anytime I work on those projects, like, all right, how do I debug this thing?
Yeah, that's the first thing you want to solve, right?
Before I even start having a bug. And then, but same thing on servers. It's, okay, we've got this thing running in production. How do I debug that in that production environment, not just at my local desktop? So I think that's learning how to work your debuggers and is an incredibly valuable tool.
And it's not just your IDE debugger, right? For web, you have the browsers that have a whole debugger built into them, and all of the dev tools inside of there as well. It's a fair amount of information that you have to know.
Yeah, I honestly wish that universities or boot camps, the very first day, they just show them how to use the debugger. Like we're going to take the time out, and before we even teach you how to code, we're going to show you how to put a breakpoint in. What is a breakpoint? How to continue? How to step over, step into, and then they start teaching them how to code using that debugger as how they're learning.
Absolutely.
Right?
Well, it would help you understand a lot of those logical controls and things like that a lot more, because you can actually do it. You step through it and see what it's doing. They do a huge disservice in not teaching it.
My first CS professor, he actually did teach with the debugger. First day in class, it's like, here's what this line of code does. We're going to go to the next one. And, he didn't even call out that as a debugger, but it's just right away he was showing like, we could just start stepping through the code.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
Okay, so now the hot topic is AI, right? You hear about it everywhere with ChatGPT. You hear it with, other, AI generated imagery. And I was, skeptical quite a bit as far as AI that would actually help you write code and generate code. GitHub Copilot came out over a year ago, and I remember seeing videos about it, hearing talks about it, but I never tried it myself because I'm like, I think that's going to be kind of terrible, and it's just whatever. I was pretty dismissive of it until I actually tried it out. And once I tried it, I was blown away by, how much time it saves, how much, the repetitive keyboarding that you would do, it actually just figures it out. So much so that I bought into it. I taught, I showed it to Tanner and to Spencer, and we all now pay for it, the $10 a month and stuff. And it's just, it is amazing.
Yeah. Now I will say it doesn't replace the developer, right? There are certain classifications of developers that I don't want to use it. They don't have enough experience to not become dependent on it. But I am astonished at how incredible it is. It is amazing.
And sometimes, especially when it comes to trivial code, or I would say most of our code is just moving data around, and you name your function a certain way, and you already know how it's going to write it, and Copilot just gives you a suggestion. You're like, yeah, that's what I was going to write.
Absolutely. Particularly on like a lot of your CRUD or pass-through methods in a service layer or something like that. Whether it writes it or I do it, it's going to be the exact same thing.
Yeah.
One area I really like it is in unit test cases, because historically those they're kind of terrible to write, because it's like, okay, now I've got to write all these lines of code where I'm just checking things. It's pretty mundane. But with Copilot, it's just like, it suggests a bunch of tests, and you're like, yeah, that looks good. That's great. Or it suggests things that maybe you didn't quite think of, or you would have been too lazy to write.
Yeah, that is true. Where it first shined on me was sometimes you create an array of the month names, January, February, March, April. And I just started typing, let months equals, and I just started typing JAN, and then it just auto completed the entire rest of the thing. So I didn't have to type out specifically January, February, March, April, it just auto completed it, and it was amazing.
Yeah. Well, and that's to the point of like the kind of the trivial mundane stuff. It's like, man, like it's going to be the same thing either way. Like, just let it do it.
I will say, when you start to actually write interesting code, or code that's a bit unique, then it starts to get a little infuriating, because it starts suggesting things that are not in line with what's actually going on or makes sense. And you just got to turn it off. It's like go away.
It can get annoying. You hit escape and it hides it, but then you type the next letter and it shows it again and stuff. So I wish there was a little bit more control of, say, okay, ignore it for the rest of this line.
You can just turn it off. You can just turn the whole plugin off.
Yeah, you can. But then I have to remember to turn it back on.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah.
Then you start to feel naked when it stops suggesting things later.
Yeah. Yeah. For us, I think we all could agree that is a good tool and should be part of the tool set for most developers beyond a certain skill set.
Mid-range to senior kind of developers for sure. Okay, so to kind of summarize, let me just go over through these tools again. For source code control, we use GitLab. For documentation, we use Confluence. For PM tools, we use Jira. For design tools, we use Figma plus Zeppelin. For QA tools, we use X-Ray with Jira and sometimes Google Sheets. For dev tools, and this is up for debate, we got PHP Storm as the winner there. The database tools in PHP Storm. We use Windows for a lot of people. Some people use Mac, and that's fine. We use WSL2, Prettier, Lint. TypeScript's a big one. Use your debuggers, and if you're above a certain level, use GitHub Copilot. So those are kind of all the tools. Thank you again for listening to our story. We'll be back next week with more stories, personal experiences, and advice on running a dev shop.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.